Hey Sunrise, welcome to the Sunrise Zapier app new expense trigger demonstration. I'm starting from my dashboard again in my Zapier account, and I'm going to navigate over to Make a Zap. First thing we need to do is select the Sunrise app, and we are demonstrating the new expense trigger. So I'll select that, log into my account here. And the first step when setting up our trigger is we need to select the organization. So I'm going to select this Lendio organization again, but for a quick refresher, all of these values are the organizations that I have created in the user account that I am currently logged into, and you are required to select an organization to be associated with this trigger. So what we're saying here is that every time that we create a new expense in our Sunrise organization called Lendio, we are going to fire off this trigger. We have an option here that we can choose an account group or multiple account groups that will help us with this particular trigger define what we want to value as an expense. So it defaults to the account group expenses, but we could select, let's see what our options are here. We could select bank and liquid assets and current assets. So only expenses created with those account groups associated with them would be considered in this trigger, but we're just going to go with the account group expenses as our default. We are going to test our trigger to find some data, and cool, we just got back an expense data object from Sunrise. And if we look at this a little closer, there's quite a bit more information than just the expense. So we've got an account with some of the account details in the returned object. So the name of the account that this expense is filed under in our Sunrise app is travel expenses, and it has an account number and a description. Here is the grouping that that account belongs to. And again, remember, we defaulted to expenses, so it is as expected. The group is expenses. If we look down here, we have the description of the expense itself. Looks like it was pens, quantity, the amount, the tax. There's something called priority. There's something called marked depreciable. That's probably app specific. And then we have something called a bill, which in Sunrise, bills can have many bill lines, or those bill lines can also be called expenses. And so this bill has some more metadata associated with it. It has some of the contact data involved. And so there's quite a bit of detail here with the object that was returned for expenses. And hopefully that can help us map to different apps when we set up actions with this trigger. And I'll show you an example now. So let's go ahead and click continue, and we will hook this up. We need to set up our action. I'm going to connect it to my Xero account, which is another bookkeeping software. And now we have to select an action, and you'll notice that Xero does not offer something called create expense. What it does offer, though, is something called create bill, which is relatively similar to an expense, and I'll show you the differences in a second. But we do have all the data we need from our trigger to properly set this up. So we'll go ahead and click continue. I've got to log into my Xero account. The first field is contact name. So if you remember when we were just kind of peeking through our data object that Sunrise returned, we did have some contact information included in that expense. And there it is, contact name, demo user. We're going to map that to that field. Email address, I don't know if we have it included here. We don't, so we're going to skip that one. It's not required. Status defaults to draft if not specified. So I'm going to leave that blank, but if we select it, we could, with this create bill action in Xero, every time one is created using this trigger or using this completed zap rather, the status of that bill, we can mark it as draft, submit for approval, or approved. I'm going to leave it as draft, and I think that that is a good recommendation as you set up these apps. It gives you some flexibility on your app side to make any kind of adjustments before you mark whatever you're creating as approved, but it's up to you. Defaults to creation date if not specified. So we need a date for our bill, and we're just going to type created. There we go. So there's a bill contact created time and a bill created time. I think we want the bill created time for our date here. Our due date, let's see if we have a due date field. We do, bill due date, and notice there's no value there. So the sample the sample expense that was sent back, the bill that's included in that data did not have a due date specified in Sunrise. However, if we ever did create a bill or an expense that did have a due date, we could map that value here. So even though it's null, this is the correct value. Currency, default currency for organization will be used if not specified. I'm not going to map a currency. I'm just going to leave it as the default currency for the organization in my Xero account. URL link to a source document. We're going to leave that blank as well. That seems pretty app specific for Xero. They have something called a branding theme, which would be a template. And in my Xero account, I only have one listed, so it's probably going to default to that anyway. So we can just go on and continue. Reference, non-unique alphanumeric code identifying the bill. We're going to leave that blank as well. I don't think that we have a reference. We can do a quick search and see if there's anything called a reference in Sunrise, but I'm going to leave that blank. And now we get to this part, their line items part of their bill. And if you remember, we are demoing the trigger expenses in Sunrise. And so expenses is essentially a line item of a bill. And here for the action, because they did not have a create expense action, we are creating a new bill in our Xero app, which is going to map those expense values. So the line item type, this is going to be specific to the Xero app, so we can select one of three choices. I'm going to leave that blank because it's not required. Line item code, you must provide either an item code or both a line item description and a line unit price. So instead of code, we're going to provide both of the line description and line unit price. So here we're looking for a description. And again, remember, in this example, expense description, these lines are actually our expense itself. So expense description pens, line quantity, let's go ahead and search for quantity. Expense quantity, there it is. Unit price, let's go for expense, let's see, expense amount is going to map to their line unit price. And then we can do line account code. So let me just select this and show you what it is. These are account codes for their various expense accounts. These may not map correctly to our Sunrise app, and so we could go to custom and we could search through our Sunrise to see if we can map something out here. And I think it's called account code possibly. Let's just look through our account data just so I can show you an example here. So we do account number 6270. Now that account number is specific in our Sunrise account too. I believe we said that this was travel expenses. So this account number 6270 is our travel expenses account. There's no guarantee that that number is going to map to whatever numbers are set up for your account codes in your Xero app. So I'm not going to map that. I'm going to leave that blank and it's not required. Line tax type, this also looks like it is a Xero app specific thing. So I could select one of these, and each time that this Zap is fired, it would apply this line tax type, but I'm going to leave that blank as well. And we can always adjust that later in our Xero app. We're going to hit continue, see if we can get a bill created here. Here's our sample data that we're sending over to Xero, maps from our Sunrise app. And voila, there we go. Cool. We created a bill with the data that we mapped from our new expense Sunrise trigger. And that is the basics of setting up a Zap using the new expenses trigger.